But just listen to me. It's more important to live in the now.
It doesn't.
And live like we're gonna die tomorrow than live like we have 20 years ahead of us, or however many years.
What is up, Iwu crew? Today, we're covering the unbelievable case of Gerald Michael Bullinger.
Behind me is exactly where investigators say they discovered 3 dead bodies.
Monday, June 19th, 2017. Deputies in Caldwell, Idaho are performing a welfare check after a concerned relative of Gerald Michael Bullinger, 60, reached out to them saying he hadn't been heard from for an extended period of time. Upon entering the property, deputies discovered 3 bodies hidden inside the shed near the farmhouse.
This is where the chickens live. Hay shed.
All 3 were severely decomposed due to the summer heat, meaning that any positive identification would require dental records and DNA samples, a time-consuming process. They were also covered in plastic and lined up, seemingly moved after death, and thick shrubbery hid them from view. Inside of the property, officers discovered several deceased animals and removed all surviving animals as an investigation commenced.
Dogs are the only thing that's grazing now. But that will...
Dogs, snakes, and birds had all been located on the property, starving and disheveled, though one of the dogs had reportedly been shot.
Seriously, just pull. Get a good grip on it. There you go. Other hand, support that hand just like that. Cock the trigger, put your finger in the trigger guard and shoot it, okay? Aim at the target. Don't think about it, just pull the trigger.
Bullinger had recently purchased the farmhouse in Caldwell with his wife of 10 years, 56-year-old CHERYL Baker. CHERYL had recently retired from her job as an art teacher and was staying in Ogden, Utah to sell the family home before joining him, giving him time to perform some repairs and decorate the property for her. The pair were used to spending time apart, but former co-workers spoke of CHERYL's enthusiasm regarding the move. She was excited to retire and spend time surrounded by nature with her husband. The pair were both avid hikers and loved the outdoors. Rafting through the Grand Canyon and taking mules up the mountains of Ogden were just some of their many adventures, and they were frequently described as peas in a pod by those closest to them. The time they did get together only reinforced this, sharing the same interests and religious beliefs. However, all was not as it seemed. Instead of performing repairs, Bullinger had moved his girlfriend of 2 years and her daughter into the property along with their vast array of pets. Nadja MEDLEY, 48, and her daughter PAYTON, 14, had no idea that Gerald had a wife. To this day, nobody knows what his plan was, why he decided to move his mistress into the property when he knew his wife would be joining him before long. Though many believe this dilemma may have been what caused the murders. A friend of Nadja described his reluctance to stay overnight and a lack of intimacy, which may have prompted him to move her into the farmhouse. Believing he had a few weeks before his wife arrived, it may have given him time to come up with a solution, though his plan to move their horses onto the property casts doubt on that theory. Maybe he hoped that CHERYL would allow them to stay. But we may never know. As a contract pilot, spending weeks away from his wife was never unusual, and she was content with the time they did get together, often only a few days between jobs. Some wonder if this is how he was able to cultivate his affair, secretly spending time with his girlfriend, but returning often enough that his wife didn't become suspicious. Nadja was described as somebody that would never have grown so close to a married man. She had a strong moral compass and a daughter to protect. After a string of losses, she was likely extremely protective of her family, and trust took time. So when she found someone so honest and willing to love her daughter like his own, it wasn't much of a surprise that she eventually ended up in a relationship with him. Before the murders, Nadja had enthusiastically posted on Facebook about her move to Caldwell with her daughter, supposedly set to happen when Mike was stable in his new job. Still healing from the death of her husband and Peyton's father in mid-2014, and the loss of a child around the same time, this felt like a fresh start for the family. A new place for them to forge their own path away from those memories. Mike had taught her daughter how to shoot, and the pair had established an especially strong bond, one that had Peyton calling him Dad before long. And the ability to live together would solidify the relationship further. Peyton, like any teenager, was active on social media and frequently uploaded videos.
Hello everybody, it's me, Peyton, and I am back for another new video with my mom.
Hi.
Most were with her mother, but one of them shows her play fighting with Bullinger.
1, 2, 3. Oh, shit. Uh-oh.
Rolling around in the leaves and laughing. There wasn't any sort of awkwardness. Peyton was just as happy with her mother. Taking her and her mother on frequent outings, it wasn't hard to see why Nadja was so willing to move with Mike.
So we are on the second day of our trip. Pretty cool, we just got back from whitewater rafting.
These outings could explain the financial struggles that plagued both of his lives. Incapable of helping Nadja with rent when she struggled and reportedly unable to afford presents for previous wives despite his hefty paycheck. The parallels don't end there, though. Both women spoke of the shed on the property.
This is where the chickens live. Hay shed. Can't even see the house because of all the trees.
CHERYL planning to turn it into an art studio, seeming to foreshadow the eventual discovery of their bodies. An eerie coincidence, but a coincidence nonetheless. Relatives of both women say that neither had any idea that the other existed, leading to the first and most widely believed theory in the case. CHERYL had decided to surprise her husband shortly after her retirement by making the 5-hour drive to Caldwell from Ogden. Something that her brother only became aware of after a friend told him of the visit. She wasn't expected to travel up until weeks later when their house was sold. But clearly, something prompted her to make the journey. Upon reaching the property, it's thought that Bullinger realized his two worlds were set to collide, surprised in a completely different way by his wife's appearance. Opinion becomes divided here as to who was shot first. Some believing that Nadja and Peyton were the first to lose their lives to prevent CHERYL from discovering his infidelity. Others feel that CHERYL was shot first, with brother Brian Baker struggling to come up with answers, only able to wonder if perhaps she was shot and killed after a plan to use the money from their Ogden house to leave her for his mistress had gone awry. The financial struggles he'd had support this theory. He could get a fresh start with that money. As CHERYL was the only owner of the house, perhaps he'd hoped to inherit that money after she was dead. Maybe Nadja or Peyton had heard something they weren't supposed to. Perhaps the dog refused to stop barking, and the shot he fired at it prompted the investigation, or it tried to defend his victims. The only evidence from that night comes in the form of a text message sent from his wife's phone, urging a friend to look after the dogs, as she didn't know if she'd be coming back to Ogden. We may never know who died first, or why Bullinger moved the bodies to the shed. Neighbors claim to have heard screams but no gunshots, though nobody reported them until after the bodies were discovered. With houses as close as just 25 feet. The fact this crime went unnoticed for almost 2 weeks confuses people to this day. Still, even these theories raise questions. What could cause a seemingly loving husband to turn into a murderer overnight?
You know what's going to happen.
Well, is this going to happen here or what?
Or what? Did you hear that?
Or was it something that had been escalating for decades beneath the mask that he wore around others? Less sudden than it seemed. Had there been warning signs that he'd left buried in the past? 1978, Salt Lake Temple, Utah. Jackie Garcia marries Mike Bullinger. What should have been one of the happiest days of her life became the start of a decade of infidelity and abuse. In interviews, she says she knew it was a mistake the second they returned from their honeymoon. Before long, arguments grew physical, and she feared for her life. During arguments, he would hit her to silence her, verbally berating her and tearing her down. The abuse was in full swing for the first 2 to 3 years of their marriage. And despite her pleas to the church and even her own parents, nobody seemed willing to help her. Seeking out couples counseling and therapy, nobody seemed willing or able to believe that Bullinger could be so violent. Sent to therapy for batterers, he never truly improved or changed his behavior and was enabled by those around him. After learning of the deaths, Garcia wondered if perhaps proper intervention could have prevented the deaths. A lot was wrong with the systems designed to protect those in abusive marriages within the church, enabling his abuse instead of challenging it. Denied access to temple divorce through the church, she was trapped until he decided to leave her for his mistress. Even after their divorce, his violence was able to continue. Speaking to the Idaho Statesman, Jackie admits that one of their 2 sons had been spanked by Bullinger at one point despite her ban on any kind of physical discipline. Her sole custody may have been the only thing protecting her children from further abuse. But his willingness to sit his sons down and tell them that his behavior wasn't their mother's business was concerning. Still, aside from her, she'd never heard of him becoming physically violent with any of his other wives. By the time they divorced in 1988 due to the affair, it's thought that Mike had surrendered his membership or been excommunicated from the Mormon Church. It's unclear as to whether he used religion to manipulate his wives and girlfriends. And while nothing is known about his second wife, the subject of his 1988 affair, Garcia believed he always became whatever somebody needed him to be. To Jackie Garcia, that was a fellow Latter-day Saint, a dimpled freshman at her university. To CHERYL Baker, a man who loved the outdoors and held a life membership at the Hindu temple with her. To Nadja MEDLEY, a fellow atheist and someone who shared her compassion and adoration for animals. And finally, to PAYTON, someone worthy of being called Dad. Someone that treated both her and her mother like royalty, that she could trust with her life. Bullinger was able to play all of those roles, but his sociopathy and infidelity followed him throughout all of those relationships regardless. He was perfect to both CHERYL and Nadja.
You know what's going to happen.
Well, is this going to happen here or what?
Or what? Did you hear that?
Seemingly happy in both relationships. But even that wasn't enough for him to remain loyal. Though little is known about his second wife, Bullinger is believed to have both married and split from her because of his infidelity, this leading him to marry CHERYL. Unlike his prior wives, CHERYL was different. Creative enough to create her own wedding dress with little assistance. but incredibly similar to Nadja in retrospect. All of his relationships followed one common route, often starting and ending with infidelity. Unaware until the relationship was over, able to compartmentalize and move between relationships without hesitation, it may have been this that allowed him to escape from police. That sociopathy is what leads Jackie to wonder if perhaps he'd found another victim. Contrary to what authorities believe, she has stated in numerous interviews that she doesn't believe he'd have taken his own life. Too egotistical and prideful to consider the option. Multiple friends and families of his victims echo this statement, more likely to manipulate another woman into taking him than to take his own life over the guilt that many believe he's incapable of feeling. Mike hasn't been seen since 2017. His car found abandoned beside an isolated campground in July that year. Nobody has been able to locate him. Though authorities strongly believe that he passed away shortly after the crime, this, like many other parts of the case, is also disputed. With extensive survival skills, some believe that he may have made his way as far as the East Coast or left the country entirely. The almost 10-day head start he had may have allowed him to fall off the grid and start a new life with another unsuspecting victim. With coverage remaining local for the most part, it wouldn't have been hard for him to fly under the radar. His ability to adapt to what was wanted or needed provided a perfect alibi. Reported sightings place him in various locations, one supposedly placing him near Mesa Falls with other unidentified men. This brings into question whether or not he was acting alone, and whether he had help in evading authorities for as long as he has. Though they may not have been involved in the murders, they could easily have enabled his escape. These accomplices could be anybody, a new girlfriend or a close friend of his. With an aptitude for manipulation and presenting as a social chameleon, it wouldn't have been hard for him to explain away any questions. Just as he took advantage of Nadja and her situation, he could easily have found another vulnerable victim. Local authorities tend to believe that he died somewhere near Bear Lake, located on the Idaho-Utah border. Sources close to the victims have heavily disagreed with theories that he committed suicide, meaning that he may have passed from exposure to the elements or attacks from wild animals. Until his remains are discovered, we may never have a concrete answer, meaning that despite the forensic evidence linking him to the murders, this case remains unsolved. For now, the relatives and friends of his victims are still trying to put their lives back together. Others read over old Facebook posts, trying to find signs they'd missed, wondering if they could somehow have prevented it. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. A playlist is going to pop up right now with more videos you'll love. See you guys next time.
And yeah, subscribe if you're new, like this video if you want to see more. Comment down below, what's your New Year's resolution? What do you want to do? What will make you happy to do? And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.